All right, let's set the scene. The date is February 23rd, 2026. And on this one day, all these events that seem totally unrelated, stuff happening in government, in a science lab, even out in the ocean, they're all starting to tell one single hidden story. It's not a story about a war between countries, but a collision between two fundamental ways of seeing the world. Let's break it down.
And really, what it all boils down to is this one epic clash. On one side, you have this relentless human drive to create rigid, top-down control. And on the other, you have the world as it actually is, complex, messy, fluid, and completely unpredictable.
Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at this idea of a world of collisions. Then, we'll dive into what we're calling the architecture of control and see what it actually does when it hits the real world. From there, we'll jump over to nature's fluid systems for a complete contrast, before we pull it all together in the Great Collision.
So what we're looking at today are all these different events. A trade policy, an immigration plan, a scientific breakthrough. They look like they have nothing to do with each other, right? But they're all just different battlegrounds for the exact same fight. The fight between wanting rigid order and dealing with fluid complexity.
First up, let's talk about that push for rigid order. What we're seeing is the administration making these massive, sweeping moves to build centralized, powerful structures and enforce really strict black and white policies on everything.
So get this. Just last Friday, the Supreme Court actually struck down the administration's global tariffs. But today, in what you can only call an incredible act of defiance, the president has just decided to bypass that ruling completely. He's using this obscure provision from a 1974 law to slap a new 15% tariff on everyone, all on his own.
At the exact same time, the Department of Homeland Security is rolling out something called its Hub and Spoke plan. I mean, the scale of this is just huge. They're trying to take almost 300 smaller detention centers and consolidate them into just 34 massive, federally owned mega centers. We're talking places designed to hold up to 10,000 people each. It's a gigantic move towards centralized federal power.
And it doesn't stop there. This new logic is even being applied to programs like TPS. What for years has been a temporary safe haven for people is now being, re-engineered into a strictly one-way street. This new Project Homecoming initiative even uses an app to nudge people toward what they call voluntary departures. It's literally turning a safety net into an exit ramp.
Okay, so you have these grand, rigid plans drawn up in an office. What happens when they actually hit the real world? Well, this is where the clean, straight lines of policy just smash right into the messy, complicated reality of people's lives.
Remember that new tariff? Well, the result is absolute chaos. This morning at the Port of Los Angeles, you've got billions of dollars in goods just sitting there. They're stuck. Why? Because the customs agents are totally paralyzed. They have no earthly idea which tax rate is even legal anymore. The old one? The one the Supreme Court just threw out? This new one? Total gridlock.
And you can literally see this collision in the raw numbers. I mean, check this out. In a small town called Social Circle, Georgia, one of the planned ICE mega centers is projected to need over 1 million gallons of wastewater treatment every single day. The town's entire system, it can only handle 660,000. So a single federal building is on track to completely break the local infrastructure.
And then, of course, there's the human cost. In Lindenwold, New Jersey, a high-profile ICE operation went down right near an elementary school bus stop, and the result was just sheer panic. Little kids were literally fleeing in terror. The school actually had to bring in trauma counselors. This isn't just a policy on paper. This is a top-down plan violently crashing into the quiet, everyday rhythm of a neighborhood.
Okay, let's completely shift gears now. Let's step away from all that and look at a world that plays by a totally different rulebook. A world that is fluid, that emerges from the bottom up, and that absolutely defies any kind of simple, rigid control. It's a really fascinating question to ask, right? While we're so busy drawing hard lines and building these concrete centers of control, what are nature and science busy building? They're showing us a universe that's built on flexibility, on adaptation, and on dynamic change. Just take this brand new discovery from UCSF and the Salk Institute. They finally figured out how billions of your brain cells, all with the exact same DNA blueprint, know how to do their own unique job. It turns out the DNA itself physically folds up into these unique little origami shapes. These 3D folds create a kind of barcode for each cell. So complexity doesn't come from a rigid fixed code, it actually emerges from a dynamic physical shape. How cool is that?
And of course, we're already trying to copy nature's playbook. In Japan, scientists just created these atom-sized gates that actually breathe like a biological cell. It's a massive step toward what are called neuromorphic computers. Basically, computers that can learn and adapt like a human brain, moving way beyond the old rigid world of just ones and zeros.
And even out in the wild, the old rulebooks are getting thrown out. Orcas are starting to show these strange, coordinated new behaviors that are baffling scientists. Unprecedented numbers are suddenly pushing into new waters around Greenland. Pods are now actively approaching and bumping huge container ships. And the aggressive ramming of sailboats, well, that just keeps escalating. These are complex, fluid, cultural shifts that we're just beginning to try and understand.
So let's bring these two worlds crashing back together. Because on one hand, you have this massive top-down push for rigid, centralized human control. And on the other hand, you have the natural world, and even our own cutting-edge technology, revealing that life is way more fluid and dynamic than we ever thought.
This is where it all just clicks into place. In the world of immigration, the conflict is brute force federal authority versus the messy, fluid challenges of the legal system. At the exact same moment in history, in genetics, we're learning that a static, rigid code is less important than dynamic, fluid folding. And in technology, we're sprinting away from rigid silicon logic and toward fluid biological models. Isn't that wild? We are trying to impose simple, top-down order on human beings at the very moment we're discovering that the rest of the universe thrives on bottom-up, emergent complexity.
And that all leads us to this one final, really big question. In this great global collision, this showdown between the desire for rigid control and the reality of a fluid, ever-changing world, what's going to give away first? The rules or reality?